Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I am John as always, and we're back for another Phyrexia All Will Be One set review. This time we're going to take a look at all the red cards. Of course, I'm excited because this is the second half of Blue-Red. As a quick reminder, this of course is a limited set review. We're talking about draft, and that's about it. We're not talking about any sort of constructed formats. These are my opinions, my first experiences with these cards, or rather my first take of these cards. It's how I'll be approaching the format at the start of the format. Who knows how things might change. But let's get started with All Will Be One. Hey, they kind of said the title. 3 red for an enchantment at Mythic. Whenever you put one or more counters on a permanent or player, All Will Be One deals that much damage to target opponent, creature an opponent controls, or planeswalker an opponent controls. This one's kind of interesting, but I think ultimately is kind of in that category of real expensive enchantment that's janky and doesn't necessarily do anything, which means I'm not going to like it. Obviously, the plan here is to proliferate a whole lot. Preferably, you're proliferating on multiple things, and each of those things would probably do 1 damage to an opponent or creature or whatever. Kind of cute. Definitely, if you want to have some fun, I can see playing this, but I feel like you're way more likely to win if you don't take an entire turn off to play this and instead just keep doing what you're doing. So realistically, I bet this is kind of an F, especially for me, but you can certainly try to have some fun with it at some point. Up next is Awaken the Sleeper. Awaken the Sleeper is 3 and a red for a sorcery at uncommon. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. If it's equipped, you may destroy all equipment attached to the creature. This is why I don't think the Black-Red Sacrifice deck truly exists. It exists when there is a common threaten effect, and here it's at uncommon, which means you're going to be a little bit lucky to even get the first one, let alone getting multiples. So unfortunately, I don't think that deck is going to be quite as good as we're used to, or at least quite the style that we're used to. If it exists, it'll be a little bit more aristocraties, like you'll definitely be sacrificing your own thing instead of ever stealing anything. I don't like these effects unless there is a very good Black-Red Sac deck in the format, and I just don't think that's going to be the case. If you are in Black-Red Sac, if you have gotten it to work, if it does turn out that it'll work, you do want these, you're just not going to get them very heavily. If you're not in that deck, you just pass this. You don't take it. It's an F unless you are in that very specific deck. Up next is Axiom Engraver. Axiom Engraver is 1 and a red for a creature Phyrexian wizard at common. It's a 1/3. It enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it. Tap and remove an oil counter, discard a card, draw a card. So you get a 1/3 for 2 with at least 2 rummages, potentially more if you proliferate or add some oil counters to it some other way. This is fine. You know, rummaging is nowhere near as good as looting, but it's still decent. Unfortunately, these days, it's not quite as powerful as it was, just because you can't really justify spending an entire creature and card on rummaging. You're going to get run over if you do that. So this is probably relatively filler, definitely in the wheel range. You probably don't have to ever spend a real pick on this. You can probably play it. It's just not going to be, you know, a big deal. Up next is Barbed Batterfist. Barbed Batterfist is 1 and a red for an artifact equipment at common. For Mirrodin, equipped creature gets +1/-1 and equip for 1. So this is a 2-mana 3/1. I like those stats. I always like those stats. Really, really, really cheap equip cost. I actually think this might be one of the better common equipments. It's very unassuming. +1/-1 is not that big of a deal, but slapping this on a flyer, like an X2 flyer, and just getting that extra point of damage in, I think could make this relatively versatile. That said, a pretty decent common equipment is still a very low pick. You are never spending a real pick on this. You are not going out of your way to get this. I just think it's playable, but I think it is very much in that wheel category. If you're in the equipment deck, it maybe goes up to just pre-wheel in like pack 3, but even then, I think this is just a fine common equipment. Don't spend a real pick on it. Up next is Blade Graft Aspirant. Blade Graft Aspirant is 2 and a red for a creature Phyrexian warrior at common. It's a 2/3 with menace. Equipment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Activated abilities of equipment you control that target Blade Graft Aspirant cost 1 less to activate. A lot of those words were hard to say one after the other for some reason. So here's your equipment. Not quite Lord, but kind of Lord. It's a 2/3 menace for 3, which is already okay. Your equipment is all 1 cheaper. That's kind of cool, but again, I've already talked about this in white. I don't know. Equipment decks are always weird because you don't want to load up on equipment because that means fewer creatures. 4 Mirrodin sort of helps that out, but your creatures from 4 Mirrodin are just tutus. So yeah, it'll help out, but I don't know how much it'll help out. And then, of course, the activated ability that targets Bladecraft would be the equip cost. So it's cheaper to equip things to this. So if the the equipment deck really truly exists, these are going to be some very good glue because they're just going to suit themselves up with potentially a bunch of equipment and smash in and require 2 blockers, which is pretty cool. So this will be the glue in that deck, and you'll want to pick them a bit high, kind of pre-wheel in that case. But I think you need to be in that deck. I don't think you pick these up and then try to get into that deck. And I still don't know what that deck looks like. So it'll be something that I keep my eye on in the first week or so. Up next is Blazing Crescendo. Blazing Crescendo is 1 and a red for an instant at common. Target creature gets +3/+1 until end of turn. Exile the top card of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play that card. Very mediocre combat trick. I need my red combat tricks to add first strike or something. This may very well not even save your creature. It will make your creature trade, probably, but it won't save your creature. And the not even quite draw a card, none of this here really works for me. It's a weak combat trick. Pick it like last pick if you can. If you happen to have a space, you can put it in, but don't try to do that. Up next is Cacophony Scamp. Cacophony Scamp is a single red mana for a creature Phyrexian Goblin Warrior at uncommon. It's a 1/1. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice it. If you do, proliferate. When Cacophony Scamp dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. I'm not quite sure I get this one. A 1/1 for 1 is cool. You don't want to sack your 1/1 for 1 when it deals damage. The whole point is it's getting in for that 1 damage somehow. You can suit this up with equipment, I guess, to get the power up, but it still has to get through, and of course your opponent controls whether or not it gets through. It only has 1 toughness, so they can definitely kill it if they have blockers. A lot of this just feels like I'm hoping I'm ahead. I'm hoping my opponent's dumb or doesn't have a board. Nothing here quite works for me. I don't like this card. I don't think I'm going to pick it. I don't think it's going to be all that good. Just nothing works for me. Like, I think the best case scenario is you play a combat trick on this or you suit it up with equipment. Your opponent doesn't block it because they don't want it to die, but so it does combat damage, and then after that you sack it and proliferate and it dies anyways, so you still get the trigger. I don't know. It feels like it requires my opponent to kind of decide what happens here. And it's always important to remember your opponent is going to attempt to win the game and is hopefully an intelligent person and will make the choice that's best for them, which is always going to be the choice that's worst for you. So I'm starting out very low on Cacophony Scamp. If it turns out to be good, cool, but I don't see it. Up next is Capricious Hellraiser, 3 red for a creature Phyrexian Dragon at Mythic. It's a 4/4. It costs 3 less to cast if you have 9 or more cards in your graveyard. It has flying. When Capricious Hellraiser enters the battlefield, exile 3 cards at random from your graveyard, choose a non-creature, non-land card from among them, and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. 3 red for a 4/4 flyer is kind of expensive. Having 9 cards in your graveyard is not a super common thing in Limited, barring self-mill or something like that. So I'm not sure you can exactly count on that. When it does come in, you do get to copy a non-creature card, which is probably going to be an instant or sorcery. If that's removal, that's probably going to be pretty good, but you'll need to have that there. Overall, I think this is a pretty weak Mythic, just due to some of the narrowness of it and the difficulty of the casting cost. I think you can probably reasonably still first pick it, but it's definitely a bit below, a crazy broken Planeswalker or something. So first pick, maybe don't get too best case scenario mentality. It's probably not often going to cost 3 less, and you may very well cast it as a vanilla 4/4 flyer with no actual ability because there's nothing in your graveyard to actually hit. And of course, keep in mind as well that you do exile 3 cards at random, so you might have 4 pieces of removal and 3 lands, and oops, the 3 lands are the ones you exiled, so even that's a big risk there. Up next is Chimney Ravel. Chimney Ravel is 3 and a red for a creature Phyrexian Goblin Warrior at common. It's a 3/3 with haste. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature token. So it is a 3/3 haste for 4, which is like 1 overcosted. It does make an extra 1/1 though, just a little bit of extra fodder. If you're being aggressive, this is probably a fine curve out on turn 4, but it is a little bit sort of basic filler. You should be able to pick this up pretty close to the wheel or a little bit after. Up next is Churning Reservoir. Churning Reservoir is a single red mana for an artifact at uncommon. At the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on another non-target artifact or creature you control. Pay 2, tap, create a 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature token. Activate only if an oil counter was removed from a permanent you control this turn, or a permanent with an oil counter on it was put into a graveyard this turn. So here's a really cool way to make your oil counter matters cards work even better. This can keep your Archfiend of the Dross from killing you. This can make your things that treat oil counters as +1/+1 counters keep growing. It's a very low cost at only a single red mana. And if you are taking oil counters off of things, such as that Archfiend, or maybe the Icy Manipulator thing, or the Scry guy, you get to make a goblin every turn if you have 2 mana. I think this is really cool and a really big part of this deck that I hope is going to be very fun to play and is supported and is good. So I'm going to start picking this up relatively highly in kind of the 3rd, 4th, 5th pick range, and I'm going to hope that that deck's really good. Up next is Dragonwing Glider. Dragonwing Glider is 3 red for an artifact equipment at rare. For Mirrodin, equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has flying and haste. 3 red is the equip cost. So this is a 5 mana 4/4 flying haste. That's really good. That's a real good red dragon right there. And then if that creature does die, which your opponent is going to have to answer the 4/4 hasty flyer, it'll cost you a lot, but you can turn another creature into a dragon as well. This will be a first pick. It's relatively powerful. Your opponent's going to have a number of answers or just straight up artifact hate to murder this. So easy first pick. Up next is Exuberant Fuseling. Exuberant Fuseling is a single red mana for a creature Phyrexian Goblin Warrior at uncommon. It's an 0/1 with Trample. Trample is what I love on my 0/1s. It gets +1/+0 for each oil counter on it, and it enters the battlefield with an oil counter on it as well. Whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you put another oil counter on it. So this, I guess, is supposed to be another of the sack benefits. You sack a bunch of creatures and you get a whole bunch of counters on this, and then you get to attack in with your X1. Which means you either have to sit back and make this huge over a very long time and hope your opponent doesn't have any of a multitude of ways to deal with an X1. And then even when you attack with it, they can block and kill that X1 with basically anything. So you need this to be huge to go over the top, over the trample part. So I don't see how this is all that good. It appears to be telling me that this and the Cacophony Scamp and all of these little 1 mana creatures that might grow or might do something are supposed to be good, but I don't see it. So for me, I'm not interested in this card, and I'm gonna just not pick it. We'll see if that deck actually happens. I expect that this Fuseling and that Scamp is going to be kind of the best deck that exists according to 17 lands in best of 1 in silver tier or something, where just going dumb aggro is the way to go, but I don't think this flies in best of 3. Up next is Forgehammer Centurion. Forgehammer Centurion is 2 and a red for a creature Phyrexian Warrior at common. It's a 3/2. Whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on this. Whenever it attacks, you may remove 2 oil counters. When you do, target creature can't block this turn. Again, we have a sack payoff, but for every 2 things you sack, you can make 1 thing not be able to block. Again, this just feels like a really, really, really weak payoff. I'm not super into that. So this feels really weak. It feels like filler for the sack deck, which I already have questions as to whether or not it actually exists and is good. So this is on the wheel for me, later than the wheel, very filler. Up next is Free from Flesh, a single red mana for an instant at common. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Put 2 oil counters on it. So this is an okay combat trick. A single mana is very easy to keep up. +2/+2 is fine, not amazing. But those 2 oil counters, especially in, specifically the blue-red deck with so many things that care about oil, plus, prowess giving you oil counters or proliferating or whatever, I think this could be pretty handy. It's on the better side of a combat trick, which means you're still never using a real pick on this. It's very much on the wheel, but it's playable, and you could make room for it if it makes sense for your deck, if your deck does care about those counters. Up next is Furnace Punisher. Furnace Punisher is 2 and a red for a creature Phyrexian warrior at uncommon. It's a 3/3 with menace. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, Furnace Punisher deals 2 damage to that player unless they control 2 or more basic lands. Oh my! Whew. Oh, could be hard to do. This is obviously just a 3-mana 3/3 with menace. That's all it is in limited. Yes, there's a bunch of non-basic lands in this set, but no. You're always going to have 2 basic lands. Your opponent's always going to have 2 basic lands. Always. I imagine I can go through this entire format and never see that trigger actually happen. But a 3-mana 3/3 haste, a 3-mana 3/3 with menace is still a very solid creature that you'll pick up in the high end of the 6th through 8th pick, and you'll always play. Good creature, mostly flavor text in limited. Up next is Furnace Strider. Furnace Strider is 4 and a red for a creature Phyrexian beast at common. It's a 4/5. It enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it. Remove an oil counter from Furnace Strider. Target creature you control gains haste until end of turn. This is actually not too bad. A 4/5 for 5 is a little expensive and no evasion, but you could take one of those oil counters off immediately and give itself haste. So a 4/5 haste for 5 is actually pretty scary, and then that second oil counter just sits there waiting for you to play something else that's scary, something big, something trampoly, something flying, and oops, surprise, haste. It's going to be very scary to see this on the battlefield. I think this is a decent pre-wheel pick in the 6th through 8th range. That said, it is a 5-drop, so I'm not going to load up on these, but I do like it. Up next is Gleeful Demolition. Gleeful Demolition is a single red mana for a sorcery at uncommon. Destroy target artifact. If you controlled that artifact, create 3 1/1 red Phyrexian goblin creature tokens. I don't think you're going to be sacking your own artifact all that much. It's cool that you have that option if those 3 1/1s is going to really help you out, and maybe sacking that artifact somehow helps out your artifact or your artifact sack payoffs. Really, this is removal for your opponent's artifacts. There are a number of artifacts in this set, but I don't think there's enough that I'm going to happily main deck this, but I will happily side it in when I do see one of those very scary artifacts. That means I'm pretty happy to pick this up on the wheel. Up next is Hazardous Blast. Hazardous Blast is 3 and a red for a sorcery at common. Hazardous Blast deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. Creatures your opponents control can't block this turn. Now you might look at this and you might think that this is a sideboard card against mites or a lot of X1s or something. And that's true. It is. It absolutely is. But if you're an aggressive deck, if your plan is to curve out with a bunch of creatures that may very well get stonewalled in turn 5, turn 6, and you can't quite finish it off, this finishes the game for you. You get a free attack with your entire board, and that will typically end the game. So if that is your game plan, Hazardous Blast is definitely something you want to put in your deck. Do not leave it in the sideboard. However, that must be your game plan. Your game plan must be kind of balls to the wall, aggro, and you need to make sure that you can finish the job. If that's not your plan, put this into your sideboard. Do not main deck it. Bring it in when you see a lot of X1s. That said, it is a very weak spell. You should not be picking this up any earlier than the wheel. You should be able to get one of these on the wheel if you do want it. Otherwise, like I said, keep it in the sideboard. But do not underestimate the ability of your opponent to just utterly be unable to block for a turn. Up next is Hex Gold Halberd. Hex Gold Halberd is 1 and a red for an artifact equipment at uncommon. For Mirrodin. As long as it's your turn, equipped creature has first strike and trample. Equip 2 and a red. So 2 mana for a 2/2 with first strike and trample on my turn is pretty dang good. That is one solid creature there. And if my opponent deals with it, I can give something else, 50% first strike and trample. This seems like a great piece of equipment. This is one that I definitely want to pick up for every deck. And if I have this in my equipment deck, awesome. This is a very good piece of equipment slash creature. So you'll pick this up relatively highly, kind of in the 4th, 5th pick range. It's real good. Up next is Hex Gold Slash. Hex Gold Slash is a single red mana for an instant at common. Hex Gold Slash deals 2 damage to target creature. If that creature has Toxic, Hex Gold Slash deals 4 damage to that creature instead. This is totally fine. This is shock, except it can't go to the face. And, sometime at random, it will be 2 shocks for the price of 1. That is a card that is pretty decent. It's been a while since shock has been a super high pick. But you can still pick this pretty happily in kind of the 4th, 5th pick range. If it turns out things are big in this format, I don't think they necessarily are. Maybe this slips to 6th through 8th, but I'm happy with it starting at 4th through 5th. Up next is Koth, Fire of Resistance. Koth is 2 red for a legendary planeswalker. Koth at rare, he starts with 4 loyalty. +2, search your library for a basic mountain card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. -3, Koth, Fire of Resistance, deals damage to target creature equal to the number of mountains you control. That presumably is at least 2. -7, you get an emblem with whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, this emblem deals 4 damage to any target. I'm not sure Koth is that good. Koth feels like a rare planeswalker to me, or at least what I think a rare planeswalker should be. His +2 is okay. It gets you a mountain, but it goes into your hand, so it's not ramping you, but it is making sure that you hit your land. It's getting your mountains in case you happen to have that emblem online already, but you're going to run out of mountains at some point, especially late in the game, the time that you've roughly ultimated your planeswalker. The -3 is going to be kind of nice, but it's going to take a few turns to be able to activate that, and then a few turns to be able to activate it again. All in all, Koth is fine. I think you'll still first pick him. I just don't think he's, anywhere near like the Wanderer, for example, that we saw. This is a rare planeswalker. This is not one that has an issue where it should be mythic. And that's fine. That's good to have. That's good balancing in game design. So first pick for Koth, maybe just not, a super duper bomb. Up next is Dotha Cackler. Dotha Cackler is 2 and a red for a creature Phyrexian Hyena at common. It's a 2/3 with trample. How did a hyena get here? Anyways, whenever Dotha Cackler attacks, it gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of permanents you control with oil counters on them. This is a great card for your blue-red oil counters deck. A 2/3 trample for 3 is somewhat mediocre, but you can jam on a piece of equipment or a combat trick or something, and keep it just a little bit above filler level. But if you have a bunch of stuff with oil counters, which a blue-red deck would certainly have, then this could be a very large, very problematic trampler that needs to be answered, needs to be blocked, and left on check could get in for quite a bit of damage. This looks pretty good to me in the, strong 6th through 8th pick. I'm very happy to give this thing a go if I have a lot of oil counters going on. But in addition, it could also hold equipment really well in a red-white deck, for example. Pretty cool card. Up next is Magmatic Sprinter. Magmatic Sprinter is 2 and a red for a creature Phyrexian Warrior at uncommon. It's a 3/2 with haste. Well, when it enters the battlefield, put 2 oil counters on target artifact or creature you control. At the beginning of your end step, return Magmatic Sprinter to its owner's hand unless you remove 2 oil counters from it. I actually kind of really like this card. It's 3 mana for a 3/2 haste that will put oil counters on your other things. And you can do that as long as you can get in with it. And then you can put the 2 oil counters on it. Now be aware, you only get 1 turn with this staying on the battlefield, because then the 2 oil counters will be gone. So then the turn after that, it will still have to come back to your hand. But this is basically repeatable 2 oil counters for any of the things that you need, as well as potentially damage if your opponent, has shields down for a moment. And they kind of at that point know they can't go shields down because they know you've got a 3/2 haster in your hand. I think this card's really cool, and I'm going to start out picking it relatively highly, kind of in the 4th, 5th pick range. I really like this. I think this will power up the oil decks quite a bit. Up next is Molten Rebuke. Molten Rebuke is 4 and a red for a sorcery at common. Choose one or both. Molten Rebuke deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and or destroy target equipment. Destroy target equipment is obviously incredibly narrow. If it happens, cool, but that's not the reason that you're playing this card. This is the 5 mana sorcery, 5 damage spell. Super common and limited. It'll frequently exist. You will frequently be super okay playing 1 and not typically 2. You'll pick them pretty low, probably pretty close to the wheel, and yeah, don't load up on them. 5 mana is a lot, but 1 is fine. Up next is Nahiris Sacrifice. Nahiris Sacrifice is 1 and a red for a sorcery at uncommon. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature with mana value X. Nahiris Sacrifice deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures. So what if Fling was sorcery speed? You can divide it among number of target creatures, but you also can't hit your opponent's face. Why, I believe that would make Fling bad. Because the nice thing about Fling is you can use it to end the game. The nice thing about Fling is it is instant speed, so you can get some value out of your creature that's going to die for some reason. You can't do any of that with this card. Furthermore, it's caring about mana value instead of power, so it's having, a very real cap of kind of 5-ish on it and nothing higher. This just seems deeply mediocre, and I have no interest in playing it. This is an F. Up next is Oxida Finisher. Oxida Finisher is 5 red for a creature Ogre Rebel at uncommon. It's a 7/5. It does have affinity for equipment, though, and it's got Trample. I do not want to pay 7 for this, but I'd be pretty okay playing 6 and pretending that it's kind of a Colossal Dreadmaw. 1 extra power, 1 less toughness. That said, if I'm paying 6 for this, I have an equipment, and I can jam the equipment on this. And now I've got something way bigger, I hope, than a Colossal Dreadmaw. So I think this is definitely going to be a creature that you'll be happy to play in your red-white equipment decks. You will not play this. You definitely will not, because if I find out that you did, you don't even want to know. And the reason for that, of course, is you're just not going to hit 7 mana in your aggressive deck. So make sure you're playing this with some equipment so that this can get a little bit cheaper. And I think you will stomp some people with it. That said, it's not a super high pick. It's definitely in sort of the very low 4th, 5th, which I guess technically would be 5th, or perhaps the high 6th through 8th. And arguably, I think you would actually prefer to pick this up once you already have a good piece of equipment or some good reasons to go into it. Up next is Rebel Salvo. Rebel Salvo is 2 and a red for an instant at uncommon. It has affinity for equipment as well. Rebel Salvo deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker. That permanent loses indestructible until end of turn. This seems fantastic. Obviously, we're a little bit hesitant about playing any more than 1 5 damage for 5 mana sorcery speed effect. How about a 3 mana instant speed 5 damage effect? This is fantastic. You will play as many of them as you can get. You will pretty happily first pick this in a lot of packs. Realistically, it's 2nd to 3rd pick because bombs exist and extraordinarily good game-winning cards exist. But you'll pick this immediately following those. Up next is Red Sun's Twilight. Red Sun's Twilight is X red for a sorcery at rare. Destroy up to X target artifacts. If X is 5 or more, for each artifact destroyed this way, create a token that's a copy of it. Those tokens gain haste. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. This definitely seems like the weakest of the Twilights so far by a gigantic margin. It is sideboard only, first off. There are artifacts in the set, but not that many that I'm happily main decking this. And I don't think you'll ever typically get more than a few with it. And the artifacts that you are blowing up, I guess it's fine to get a copy of them, but you don't get to keep them. I don't know. Nothing about this seems great. It seems like a sideboard card only and one that you'll pick up pretty late. So I'm going to throw this way into the wheel. And, in some matchups, especially blue, maybe it'll come out of the sideboard feeling great. But otherwise, you should just leave it there. Up next is Resistant Sky Warden. Resistant Sky Warden is 3 red for a creature Ogre Rebel at uncommon. It's a 5/5 with Menace and Reach. This thing is a real big beefer. 5 mana, 5/5, perfect vanilla test pass there, and it's got Menace and Reach on it, which means that it works amazingly as a defensive card with that Reach, just picking every single flyer out of the sky, and it works really good as an aggressive creature because your opponent has to put a bare minimum of 2 things behind it. This card's just real solid. It's not a bomb, it's not a game ender, it's not amazing removal. We're going to put it in the 4th, 5th range, but it's pretty good. Pick it, play it. Up next is Blade Scamp. Blade Scamp is a single red mana for a creature Phyrexian Beast at common. It's a 1/1 with haste. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Blade Scamp. Tap, remove an oil counter from Blade Scamp. It deals 1 damage to each opponent. So another 1/1 for 1 here. It's got haste, so that's cool. And whenever I get prowess, I get to put an oil counter on it that I can then ping my opponent with it. This feels like actually another good card for my precious special blue-red prowess deck, because every prowess spell now has a ping attached to it, and that's going to add up. That's going to add up quite quickly, and then proliferate could have 2 pings on it if it's a non-creature spell that proliferates, so I can get 2 oil counters. I really like this little guy. He's going to go in my blue-red spells deck. I don't think I'm going to have to spend a real pick on him. I think he's way down in the 6th through 8th pick range, and if there's nobody else drafting blue-red, this guy should be basically free. Up next is Shrapnel Slinger. Shrapnel Slinger is 1 and a red for an artifact creature Phyrexian Beast at common. It's a 2/2. When Shrapnel Slinger enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. When you do, destroy target artifact an opponent controls. Very filler here. It's a 2/2 for 2 that in some number of matchups is just going to be a vanilla 2/2 for 2. I guess artifact creature maybe could be French vanilla. I don't know. And sometimes it'll be some artifact removal if you want it to. Again, I think this is pretty filler. Maybe even sideboard. If you just have better creatures, leave this in the sideboard until you see some artifacts you want to blow up. So I think you can pick this up on the wheel pretty handily. Up next is Slobat, Iron Goblin. Slobat is 2 and a red for a legendary creature Phyrexian Goblin Artificer at rare. It's a 3/3. Tap and sack an artifact. Add an amount of red equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Spend this mana value only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. Hoo boy. Slobat's ability seems bad, which I guess is on theme. Like, you want your artifacts generally, right? So why are you sacking them to get mana that you can only spend on artifact spells or activate abilities? That all seems bad. This seems like a 3/3 for 3, which is okay, but, these days a Centaur Courser has become kind of filler as opposed to actually being actively decent. So I think you should be able to pick this up on the wheel, and I don't think you should get any rare blindness going on here. Up next is Solfem, Mayhem Dominus. Solfem is 2 red for a legendary creature Phyrexian Horror at Mythic. It's a 5/4. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. 1 Phyrexian red, discard 2 cards, put an indestructible counter on it. So it's a 5/4 for 4. Already, we are 100% always playing this 100% of the time. Sold. There's not a lot of non-combat damage that you're dealing to your opponent in this set. There's some, and always keep in mind that life loss is not damage. There is more damage that you can deal to creatures. That shock that deals 2 damage to anything that's not toxic now deals 4 damage to toxic things. That's cool. I don't think this is going to be an incredible upside, but it'll be a very nice upside every single time you do double some of that damage. And as I mentioned at the top, it's attached to a 5/4 for 4 that you can probably somewhat easily get that indestructible counter on it, discarding a couple of lands a little bit later into the game. This thing is great. It's an easy snap first pick. I just don't think that first paragraph is going to trigger a ton, but it will be great when it does. Up next is Thrill of Possibility with great art by local London, Ontario artist Pendersky. Thrill of Possibility, of course, is 1 and a red for an instant at common. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards. I love Thrill of Possibility. This just makes red decks tick. It just keeps them going, keeps them getting card advantage. In this set, there's enough things that care about non-creature spells being cast that this will trigger things. I like Thrill of Possibility quite a bit. I usually play one or two of them in a lot of my red decks. You don't have to spend real picks on it. It is very much in the 6th through 8th or even wheel range, but I like it, and I'll certainly play it, and I'm happy to see it back. Up next is Urabras Anointer. Urabras Anointer is 3 and a red for an artifact creature Phyrexian wizard at uncommon. It's a 4/2. When Urabras Anointer enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of permanents you control with oil counters on them. So this is another good payoff for the oil counter deck. 4/2 for 4 is not stats that I'm typically happy to play. This is certainly a card that I want to play very late into the game. I want to have played a number of permanents with oil counters on them, you know, get this dealing 3, 4, 5 damage to something, and then playing it as a lava axe that also has a 4/2 attached to it. I'm definitely going to be on the lookout for these as well for that oil deck. I'm going to be picking them probably a little bit highly just to make sure that I can get myself into that deck, maybe in kind of the 4th, 5th pick range, kind of the high 4th, 5th pick range, and I'll certainly feel rewarded to get them a little bit later. Up next is Urabras Forge. Urabras Forge is 2 and a red for an artifact at rare. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put an oil counter on Urabras Forge. Then create an X1 red Phyrexian horror creature token with trample and haste, where X is the number of oil counters on Urabras Forge. Sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step. So this making a token every turn is actually quite powerful. The first 1/1's going to suck. The second 1/1 is, or sorry, the second 2/2. Nope, let's do it again. The second 2/1 is not going to be great. The 3/1's going to start to get to be problematic. And then the 4/1, 5/1, 6/1, that's a big problem. Now you might be thinking, well, it's going to take so many turns to get up to that. It'll take 5 turns to get up there. Proliferate. You can jump those turns. You can very quickly get this into, just a real big trample thing coming in every single turn, and it's going to be a very real threat. I think this card is pretty good with the small exception that it is terrible off the top of your deck. Late game, if you've been in a board stall or you're trying to cling on and you draw this and you get a 1/1 that doesn't even stick around, it's going to suck. So unfortunately, I do think there is a downside to this. I'm going to play it just hoping that I always get it on 3, knowing that it's going to be bad a little bit later. So I'm going to first pick this when I see it. Power level wise, it's definitely a bit lower than that, but I'm going to start out with a first pick. Up next is Vindictive Flamestoker. Vindictive Flamestoker is a single red mana for a creature Phyrexian wizard at rare. It's a 1/2. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Vindictive Flamestoker. Pay 6 and a red and sacrifice Vindictive Flamestoker. Discard a card from your hand and draw 4 cards. This ability costs 1 less to cast to activate for each oil counter on Vindictive Flamestoker. I like this a fair bit as well. It's a 1/2 for 1, which is not something that I typically care about, because what do those do? They get in for 1 damage, maybe, if you're real lucky, 2. But this one then just sits there and picks up those oil counters, which, as we've seen, can matter for some other things, and it makes its ability cheaper, and eventually you're paying a relatively low cost to just casually draw 4 cards. You only get to do it once, but it's 4 cards. For potentially 1, 2, 3 mana? That's fantastic. This card seems like a first pick as well. It is not a bomb. And so, in fact, I think I'll actually knock this down to maybe a second, third pick. I would probably pick ludicrous, powerful, unconditional removal over this. But beyond that, it's pretty dang good. Up next is Volt Charge. Volt Charge is 2 and a red for an instant at common. Volt Charge deals 3 damage to any target. Proliferate. This is way back from Scar's Mirrodin block. It is great. It hits any target, which means it can just end the game. It proliferates. That's oil counters, that's poison counters, that's whatever you happen to need. It can kill the creatures. It slices, it dices. It's great. It is a very high pick, way up in the second, third pick range. Our final red card is Volshock Splitter. Volshock Splitter is 3 and a red for an artifact equipment at common. For Mirrodin, equipped creatures get +2/+0, equip 2 and a red. So it's 4 mana for a 4/2. I've already said I don't like those stats for that cost. And then for 3 mana, I can give something else that maybe has a slightly bigger butt, +2/+0. That's okay, but at that point, we're talking about 7 mana invested into this. This looks like your very filler. Probably shouldn't play it. You really didn't get the good uncommon equipment yet, did ya? And you think you're going to play the red-white equipment deck? Kind of card. Try your best to not play this card. It should be very low in your pick order, way in the far side of the wheel. There's some good equipment in this set. Find that, play that. Not this one. That's going to wrap it up for red. As you can obviously tell, I'm very excited for red, for the red-blue oil, red-blue prowess kind of stuff. Much less interested in the red-white equipment stuff, but the red part of the red-white equipment deck does seem to be better than what I saw in the white. Very much looking to give this a go. The red-black sacrifice deck, we've now seen red, we've now seen black. I don't get that deck, and I don't think it's actually going to exist in any good way. But let me know whatever you want to let me know in the comments down below. You can always find me over at twitch.tv/TheManaLeak every Wednesday. This coming Thursday, you'll be able to see me in the early access Phyrexia event playing a bunch of All Will Be One draft, and probably a sealed, maybe a sealed. We'll see. I don't like the sealed interface on Arena. I don't like much of Arena. Anyways, you can find thoughts like that over at twitter.com/TheManaLeak, and of course patreon.com/TheManaLeak if you want to help the channel out directly. Some great people over there help keep this channel going. Let me know anything you want to let me know in the comments down below. Click that like button, click subscribe if you're not, and I will see you all next time.